If you really want to support this rising growth stock, just watch a game and come to a game. I will tell you, every person, male, female, old, young, race, when they come to a game, they love it and they come back or they go back and watch and they start to get invested in the players and the fandom. I always say we have the most avid and rabid fans because you get connected to it and you're connected to something more than just sport. We sit at the intersection of sport, culture, society.
Welcome to the Design of Business.
The business of design.
Where we introduce you to people from all over the world, from different industries and disciplines,
who are here to talk about design, business, civility, and the values that govern how we work and live together.
This season, we are observing equity.
I'm Jessica Helfand.
And I'm Ellen McGirt. This episode of the Design of Business, the Business of Design, is powered by Deloitte's DEI Institute. Deloitte believes that bold actions can help drive equitable outcomes, and conversations like this can fuel the change needed to continue to build a more equitable society. Visit Deloitte's DEI Institute site at deloitte.com/US/DEI Institute for more of their research and perspectives on equity. Later on, we'll hear from Cathy Mitchell, Deloitte's Chief Purpose and DEI Officer.
Ellen, today we're talking WNBA.
We sure are. And you just heard some live sound from a WNBA game between the New York Liberty and the Chicago Sky at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. This game took place in May, and our amazing producer, Alexis, was there to cheer them on and to capture some podcast sound for us.
Now, I heard this game was kind of a big deal.
It kind of was. It was the first matchup between reigning MVP Breanna Stewart and her Liberty team, and the Chicago Sky rookie Angel Reese, the phenom out of LSU who was part of the 2024 rookie class. That includes Caitlin Clark and Cameron Brink.
And this rookie class is just one of the reasons that in the first month of the 2024 season, WNBA viewership is up an astounding 186% from the same point last year. Viewership averaged out to almost 1.5 million viewers per game just in the month of May.
If you haven't heard already, the WNBA is definitely having a moment.
The 28th WNBA season gets underway tonight, and with so many new players joining our favorite all-stars on the court, it really feels like we're ushering in a new era of women's sports.
Today, the legacy of the Golden State Valkyries begins. The WNBA's newest team's name was celebrated around the Bay. The team shop packed with new merchandise and instant fans.
The WNBA is expanding outside the U.S. for the first time.
I am honored to officially announce that we have awarded the City of Toronto the 14th WNBA franchise.
The NFL had Brady versus Manning. In the NBA, it was Bird versus Magic. And now in the WNBA, it's Caitlin Clark versus Angel Reese, both playing key roles in the recent rise of women's
Today,
basketball.
we are talking to the lady who leads the league, WNBA Commissioner Cathy Engelbert. Cathy's actually the league's very first commissioner. She stepped into the role in 2019 after 33 years at Deloitte, including 5 years as their CEO. She is a lifetime basketball lover, but this was her first time working in sports.
Being the first commissioner of a professional sports league is such a feat. I'm just imagining her walking onto the court, basketball in hand, into a completely empty stadium, looking around like, where is everybody? I know that isn't quite how it happened, but Cathy walked into the WNBA in 2019, just 2 years after the league had its lowest viewership numbers since its founding in 1996. It wasn't for lack of talent. Over the last 5 years, the league has really blossomed under her leadership.
The league saw a 200% increase in revenue in 2023 from the prior year, and they are currently negotiating a TV deal independently of the NBA for the very first time. And just in the past month, they've made two enormous announcements. One, the WNBA is adding 2 expansion teams in coming seasons, one in San Francisco and one in Toronto. And 2, that players will now fly charter to and from their games, which is an enormous step forward for overall player wellness.
You know, it's really been a joy to watch all this unfold. We talked to Cathy about what key levers she pulled to make this growth happen and why the growth of the WNBA is bigger than sports, because it really is. It's bigger than pay equity even. To me, and Jessica, I'm curious what you think about this. It's further proof that female excellence is worthy of the attention and respect of everybody, all genders, exploding that second-tier status that somehow women's efforts are less than men's. And that, pardon the pun, is the game changer.
When you mentioned you pictured that picture of Cathy Engelbert walking out on the court for the first time with the basketball in hand, I'm imagining that scene in Sex and the City when Sarah Jessica Parker walks the runway and falls in heels, which I don't know why my mind went there. I think we're nothing without the kind of humility that lets us imagine the catastrophizing of things going south. But in fact, things are going anything but south for these lovely people. Today's episode, by the way, is a twofer. Later in the episode, we will hear from sports reporter Lindsay Gibbs on the history of the WNBA, in which she gets into sticky issues like player pay and what the league has to actually do to keep on growing.
That's going to be a mini WNBA history lesson, so do stay tuned for that. But up first, here is our conversation with Cathy Engelbert, the commissioner of the WNBA. Cathy, we know that you've been awfully busy saving the world, changing the world for sports fans everywhere. So to welcome you to our Quieter podcast, we've invited two very special guests, inspiring to all, to welcome you. Ready?
Angel and Caitlin, let's go.
And the crowd goes wild. Thank you so much for being here.
I love it. That's fun.
Jessica, you want to start us off?
I do. It's been a wild few months for you at the WNBA, Cathy. You've got a draft, a new expansion team, and the WNBA is in a period of what seems to we civilians to be a period of unbelievable growth. We were wondering, just to get us started, Cathy, what have been some of the highlights for you given this incredible period?
Well, it is an incredible moment and momentum around women's sports here in the United States as well as globally. And we've kind of been waiting and preparing for this moment, not thinking it would come quite so soon, but we've been in a huge business transformation. But it really is the confluence of a lot of things happening at one time, a lot of positive elements for once in women's sports. And it's, the valuation of our assets are going up, whether that's a patch on the uniform, whether it's an endorsement of an individual player or a team. We're seeing lots of corporate partners step up. So the confluence of all of that and brands really recognizing that women's sports is on the rise. I call it, we're a growth stock. One of our owners said that. And we really are. And so it's a confluence of great play on the court, great personalities of the players, also the generational rookie class, capital inflows. I mean, Ellen, I never thought that we'd be able to raise that $75 million in capital back in February of 22 and then deploy that against a lot of different things that are coming to fruition now around marketing around the league, around global expansion. You mentioned expansion. Just announced a new Toronto team last week, in addition to one in Golden State back in the fall. We announced that. It's been quite this confluence of all these positive elements happening at the same time. And couldn't be more proud of what the players are doing, how they're showing up. And it's hard to be a professional athlete. And there are women in the workforce too, just like we are. And, really excited as we think about this talent. And it's not just this year, it's for the next 4 years. We're starting to see huge talent coming out of the college ranks coming into the WNBA.
So I wanted to ask about that too, because it suddenly matters to us that everybody is a fan of women's sports. It's not just women. It's not just their parents. It's suddenly everybody. What are some of the beneficial knock-on effects of this for student athletes or just communities?
Yeah, I think when brands step up to endorse female athletes, one of the things that they're finding is the fans, for instance, we got a lot of fan data now. Fans are more apt to buy from that brand if they see it advertised in the WNBA or women's sports. If 80% of every household consumer purchasing decision is made or influenced by a woman in the US, then why wouldn't brands want to support women? So it's kind of all of that. And that's fueling a lot of our growth, and it's fueling a lot of the ability for these players to be recognized. Because the one thing I know coming from business that I learned very quickly in sports, you need 3 things to be successful. You need household names, you need games of consequence, and you need rivalries, because that's why people want to watch. mean, the game has to be great, and our game is great, but you need those other three things. And that's what's kind of coming together now. And brands are recognizing it for the first time. And they're really standing not only behind the athletes in college, but we see our players get a lot more opportunities once they come to the WNBA, because now they have a national and global footprint rather than maybe just a local, and national footprint that they had in college.
This is a real marketing sort of force field that you've actually are inhabiting there, and really setting up for the future of these teams. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to this vision? It's my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that the WNBA hasn't always had such marketing prowess and genius. So perhaps you could tell us a little bit and help us dig into that.
Yeah. So when I came into the league a few years ago, again, out of kind of accounting and consulting and my whole life, 33 years before, not really marketing, but brand was always very important. And so we had one marketing person. We had very little budget. We had very little people. And so doing that capital raise and kind of fueling off this growth, we're able to hire people. We've invested in technology. We invested in people. It's great to have financial capital, but you need human capital. So we now have over 25 people in marketing. And once you hire the right team, so I still say, everyone's like, how'd you do it? First, we got capital. Then we hired human capital, and now we're able to afford to run marketing spots. I mean, even during the NBA playoffs right now, and even I saw during the NHL playoffs, there's WNBA players in a lot of the ads that are being done by a State Farm and a CarMax and a McUltra, and the list goes on. And they've been such great partners with giving exposure to these athletes, because that's how you build household names, and that brings more fans into the funnel. I have people come up to me and say, they're starting to idolize these players like they do in the NBA. And so it's interesting. When I first joined the league, this is actually a really interesting marketing perception that my CMO, and we never had a chief marketing officer until I hired a longtime Nike executive, 27-year Nike guy. And who does marketing better than Nike, especially in basketball? No one. And so when I hired Phil Cook, the one thing he said to me, he goes, what's really interesting about the WNBA, he said, from kind of an outside in perspective, he said, is one, in the NFL, a couple quarterbacks are well-known, things like that, but they wear helmets, teams. In the NBA, it's to players, Steph, LeBron, KD, Giannis, now Jokic, Luka. And in the WNBA, the loyalties to the league, we needed to drop down to the players and the teams, because that's why people attend games. That's why people watch games. So it's great to be up here and stand for the power of women and women in sports and be the longest tenured women's professional sports league in the country, by the way, by double any other. So again, I feel very blessed to be leading that. But you need people to know the players. So now Angel comes in and you hear that comment. Caitlin Clark, Camila Cardoso, when she comes back from being injured, is going to be amazing. Cameron Brink and Rickea Jackson out in LA. And now the next couple years of generational players like Kiki Rice and Juju Watkins at USC and Hannah Hidalgo at Notre Dame. We've got this Paige Beckers next year coming in from UConn. We have this 4-year run of amazing generational rookies that these young boys and girls are watching. And that's why it's such a great time to be in the WNBA.
I have a big question for you about the purpose-driven nature of female sports, but particularly the WNBA, which we saw really come to the front during COVID. But I want to circle back to that moment where you're leaving this extraordinary career in business, the technical side of business, Deloitte, and you choose the WNBA's never had a commissioner before, and you walk into, I'm just imagining an empty stadium. What's your pitch?
So pitch is that, with a little investment, we're going to put this league on the map. We're going to put these players on the map. We had a 3-pronged strategy when I first came in. Well, we had no strategy when I first came in. I said, what's our strategy?
Right,
and people kind of looked at me funny on my team, a very small team at the time, maybe 12 people. And the first thing I said, now I know I need capital. So the pitch was, we're a growth story. We're a legitimate sports media and entertainment property. And it was actually one of our owners who called me and said, he was invested in SPACs and things like that. He goes, Cathy, you have a real business. We just need to grow revenue. We need to grow fandom. So we came up with a very simple 3-pronged strategy. We're going to be player first, stakeholder success, because it's a very different stakeholder group than I was used to in the corporate world. You have 12 different owners, now 14 are essentially running small businesses. And then you have a union, and that's an important stakeholder. You have fans, you have media, very, very different stakeholder group. And then The third thing was the fan experience. We made it way too hard to be a fan of the WNBA. So we've taken that capital, and that was our pitch is we're going to take that capital. We're going to invest in those 3 pillars that, by the way, sit on the foundation called the game. And the game's never been better. The brand's actually really strong. The organization needed total transformation. And then the ecosystem, which is still a total mess in how media companies and corporate partners value women's sports. We're really making a difference of changing that. Less than 1% of all corporate partnership dollars going to sports goes to women's sports. That number's changed because of companies like Ally and State Farm and American Express and AT&T and Deloitte. So that number has literally changed overnight, which I thought it would take 5 to 10 years.
Amazing. I want to ask you a question about a different stakeholder, and that's the players themselves. Which is a women-led organization that really is all about these young women who are just starting out in these remarkable moments in their lives. We read last month that you announced the teams would fly charter this season. And I was thinking about this sort of idea of overall player wellness this morning when I read that Melinda French Gates will be donating $1 billion over the next 2 years to individuals and organizations working on behalf of women. She's focused on the reproductive rights, but this question of wellness and supporting these women emotionally and in terms of their development and evolution as players, but as young people who are really need a certain kind of support. Could you talk about how that factors into your strategy and your planning?
Yeah, it's a great question because the mental tax on athletes, professional athletes, women of color is a toll. And I found that out when, we all spent 92 days together in the WNBA bubble during COVID, trying to save this league that was just surviving at the time and now thriving 4 years later. So it is an important part of our platform. We have a whole social justice council, and every year we've asked the players, it's very player-led, but league facilitated. And we ask the players, you can't have an eight-lane highway in what you want to focus on, whether it's maternal reproductive rights, whether it's maternal health, whether it's with a focus in communities of color, whether it's LGBTQ plus rights, things like that. So, we ask our players, let's narrow what your focus is each year. This year, it'll be on civic engagement. Obviously, we have an election year this year, a general election. And that's why the first pillar of my 3-pronged strategy is player first. Because when you do that, you build trust with the players, and the players are more apt to, do things together with the league, because it's important that we work together because they have strong stances in the community on a lot of issues. They're role models. They're, I call them very, community minded. We're still building something bigger here on kind of the mental health side, but it's certainly something I know the players are very, very dedicated to.
You mentioned the COVID bubble. I always recommend the 144 documentary, the ESPN 144 documentary, because that was the first time I really got a chance to see the deep commitment of the players as they were thinking through in real time the big issues of being parents, of being community leaders, and of caring about social justice. What advice do you have for other leaders in other industries who are struggling with a passionate, excellent workforce who are trying to do a better job working through together how they want to weigh in on these big social issues?
Yeah, it's complex. And the one thing I tell our players, and this is what I used to say when I was at Deloitte, if you use your voice on everything, you lose your voice. So find the things that are important to you, to your talent, to your workforce. Find the things that are important and then kind of go hard at those. You don't have to speak up on everything. We have, as we know, Ellen, we've been in the trenches in a very divisive society for a long time now, but it is important to use your voice when it's an important issue to you, your players. So that's why, again, coming off of that 2020 season with, a global pandemic causing global economic hardship for a lot of people, George Floyd, Jacob Blake, then we get thrown in the middle of a political battle in Georgia for that Senate seat with one of our owners. So, I just think about everything that happened in that 5-6 month period of time and how the players stepped up, and we talked to them about how to be an advocate for the things that are important to you. And so that would be my advice to any leader of a business is go hard at the things that matter and make sure you're listening. One thing that, I didn't have any sports background other than having played and growing up in a big family with 7 siblings and always playing sports. But coming in. Sports is big business about relationships. You've got to build trust with your stakeholders, particularly in our case, the players early, and that's what we did. But make sure you listen. I mean, I spent probably the first 3 months in the league doing a 12-city tour and just doing a lot of listening, which, by the way, I hadn't done a lot of in a long time because I was leading a firm of 100,000 people, and we were just decisions, allocation of capital, culture change, all that. But yeah, I listened for quite some time because this was a different stakeholder group for me.
I would imagine growing up in a family with all those siblings, you had to do your share of listening. And the sports part is interesting to me because my boyfriend comes from a big family and sports is part of the language that I am learning. I am on the other side of this. For someone who doesn't know a lot about the NBA, I'm looking at myself and my family. We were not big sports people, but I've become so interested in your story and what you're building there and what you've done in the 5 short years as the WNBA's commissioner. What would you say to someone who has never watched a WNBA game? What would you say makes the WNBA so special?
Yeah, I think it's the players. It's always going to come back to the players. And, we now say watch, buy, attend, rep, because everyone's like, why don't they get paid? Oh, no, because you got to watch, buy, attend, rep. And if you really want to support this rising growth stock, just watch a game and come to a game. I will tell you, every person, male, female, they old, young, race, when they come to a game, they love it and they come back or they go back and watch and they start to get invested in the players and the fandom. I always say we have the most avid and rabid fans because you get connected to it and you're connected to something more than just sport. We sit at the intersection of sport, culture, society. And I think the players have done an amazing job of putting on a product on the court. It's got to start with that. But everything they stand for, I can't tell you when Steph Curry and Sabrina Ionescu did the 3-point competition during the NBA All-Star Weekend. To have Sabrina out there on that platform, I can't tell you how many moms now come up to me and say, because my daughter, 8-year-old, 10-year-old, 12-year-old, saw Sabrina on that court, on that stage, she picked up a basketball now, or she picked up a sport. And we know girls who play organized sports tend to build leadership skills and resilience. And so I talk to moms and dads about that a lot, that, the more, not every kid has to play sports, but come watch and you'll see, where the leadership is coming from. Well,
speaking of leadership, and I'm not rushing you out of the post, but I do want to ask my succession question because you are also a role model, and I'm hoping that there's going to be more women who will be team owners, right? As the league expands, but there'll be more women in professional life in major sports because they're going to be bringing up these issues of physical and mental wellness. They're going to be bringing up these issues of pay equity. How do you think about training the next generation of sports executives? And how are you going to think about your successor?
Yeah, I feel so blessed to be from a culture like Deloitte that was an apprenticeship model where we always worked on succession. I mean, the first thing I did when I became the CEO there, we put together kind of a succession management and development process, identified 30 next generation leaders, 2 now of which have succeeded me in success of 4-year term. So I'm really proud of that. And same thing here. And building a team of people, whether that successor comes inside the WNBA or outside, all the presidents before me and now me as commissioner came from the outside. And if we could really work on developing our internal candidates, I mean, I have some fabulous people now working for me that I have my eye on, but you always look outside for succession too. So I think the sign of a great leader is one who's working on succession the moment they get in the role, because it is important. I'm not going to be here forever. And I'm, now in my 38th year of business, let's call it, and now the business of sports. And I love sitting at this intersection of business and basketball, and to find people, especially women, who want to sit at that same intersection is how I'm thinking about succession.
And then they're prepared to do other things out in the world too. I mean, that's the beauty of it, is that it just sort of, it blossoms the excellence. Sorry, Jessica, I didn't mean to shut you off there.
No, I actually, with the time we have left, I wondered if there's anything that you'd like to talk about that we haven't asked you, because we, of course, could do this for 4 more days, and we realized we have about 7 more minutes.
No, I just say, look, coming from leading a firm of 100,000 to a league of 144 players is a little shock to the system, I must say. So, but one piece of advice I give, young people thinking of a career transition like I had, was like, write 3 things down on a piece of paper, just 3 things. Like, don't write 9 or 15, write 3 simple things and follow it as you think about what you want to do in your career. Because it's even a nice goal setting type of leadership development thinking that you could put in. And I wrote down 3 things when I was retiring from Deloitte. I wanted something different, something with a broad women's leadership platform, and something I had a passion for. And my father was actually drafted into the NBA in 1957 by the Detroit Pistons. So that's where the passion thing came from, and growing up in a big family. So, and then, broad women's leadership platform. Oh yeah, this checked that box way more than I thought it would, because I inherited a small league, but we've obviously are on the map. And then something different. Again, the business of sports isn't that different. You're building something, you're transforming. We did a whole digital transformation, but the impact on tens of millions of young girls and boys, by the way, you should see the boys, we all talked about girl dads when I first came into the league, and Kobe Bryant, who was, I had met with, a couple months before that horrible tragedy. And, people talked about that, but no, this is for young boys and girls and youth to see female role models like the WNBA player. So again, I'm so blessed to be in women's basketball, because again, we've got 4 more years, 10 more years, decades of the impact that these players are making today. And even just announcing a team in Canada. So it's our first team outside the United States. It's amazing the generations that they're telling me, the generations of young girls that you're impacting by bringing a WNBA team here.
You're going to be renegotiating your TV contract next year. That's a big thing. How are you preparing for that?
Actually, already doing it. Another thing that you can't wait until you're going to announce it or till your current one expires. So our current one expires October of 25. So after next season, less than 5% of all media coverage covers women's sports. That year, we only had 80 of our 240 games on national platforms. Last year, we had 205 of our 240. So if you build it, they will come. We got more national TV spots. We got better windows. We got better times. And our teams and our players have stepped up to fill, essentially a building of the business around that. So again, our viewership is on par with some of the men's professional leagues, yet their rights fees are 12 to 15 times ours. So how do I bridge that gap? What are the quantitative and qualitative metrics that they're using that we're not filling? Because guess what? Then over the next 2 to 3 years, and again, this was 2.5 years ago, we can fill those gaps and build so we can get a historic media valuation. And that's what we're going to do. I'm very excited. So stay tuned.
And the crowd goes wild.
Thanks, Cathy. Thanks so much.
Okay, Jessica, before we reflect, did she convince you to tune in to the WNBA?
Well, I was already intrigued by our wonderful producer, Alexis, getting all excited about this episode.
That's like my favorite part of this, actually, is watching Alexis be just so happy.
The joy that somebody gets from watching sports is something that perhaps escapes me because of my own sports challenge background. Simultaneously, I learned that my son's partner of many years is a lovely young woman named Tarpley Hitt, who's working on a book about Barbie, as a matter of fact, is doing some reporting for a financial website, writing a story about pay and the WNBA. And I've known this girl for 15 years, turns out to be a huge WNBA fan. So here are 2 people close to me who just get all enthusiastic when they talk about this. So yes, it's gotten me kind of excited to start watching some games.
So, and I'll tell you, Cathy walking into that empty arena and not face planting meant that she had the focus and the confidence and the wellspring of excellence herself to look around and understand what needed to be provided. Where is the marketing? Where is the outreach? Where are we taking better care of the players? And where are we handling external threats that you couldn't predict, like COVID? Amazing.
I found her incredibly impressive as a very approachable, very human, but extremely skilled leader. Right. And those things don't always go hand in hand. You more than anybody could probably tell us of people that you've interviewed in your long career as a business journalist. But I think her enthusiasm shines through, her experience and expertise shine through. Right. I mean, this is somebody who understands the different branches of what it takes to lead an organization that is changing and growing and expanding. And the challenges for viewership, the challenges for fans, the challenges for fundraising, they're just enormous.
We've had women's basketball on the brain since our conversation with Cathy. And we wanted to learn a little bit more about how this current moment fits into the league's almost 30-year history. After the break, our amazing producer, Alexis, will talk with sports reporter Lindsay Gibbs. Lindsay writes the women's sports newsletter Power Plays and co-hosts the feminist sports podcast Burn It All Down. Now that's a title. She was also featured in Shattered Glass, a documentary about the WNBA's Player Association that came out this spring. So stay tuned. I'm here with Kwesi Mitchell, Deloitte's Chief Purpose and DEI Officer and good friend and sponsor of today's episode. Good to see you, Kwesi. Thank you for joining us.
It's good to be here, Ellen.
I want to ask a question that was one of the first questions that we ever discussed years ago when we first started talking about these issues, which was the value of DEI in the workplace, in organizations. Can you share what you believe to be the key benefits of implementing DEI practices into any organization, particularly now?
I think that there's a multitude of things, as we talked about over the course of several years, Ellen, on the importance of DEI and the practices within the workforce. I do think the business case on DEI being good for business and that it creates a more diverse and inclusive organization that is a more effective one. It creates diversity of thought. It creates diversity of action. It also allows for organizations to be more nimble and innovative. So that's a core piece of why DEI is important. The other piece of why DEI is important is that for people who are truly focused on it and they're dismantling all of the inequitable practices that have accumulated within core aspects of the way that businesses operate historically, it really is a situation that benefits all employees. So for me, the critical aspect of DEI is that doing it well benefits all. And it helps us to navigate beyond the tribalism or some of the zero-sum thinking that can, in fact, surface in organizations and is a reflection of what's taking place in society more broadly, that we really need to make sure that people understand and use DEI as an enabler to rise all tide.
Always great to hear concrete ways we can move forward. I appreciate you, Kwesi.
Same. And it's always a pleasure talking to you, Ellen.
My name is Lindsay Gibbs. I am the author and founder of the women's sports newsletter Power Plays.
The WNBA is seemingly everywhere at this moment. We have record high viewership numbers, revenue numbers, like the draft is the highest watched in league history. But the league is also almost 30 years old at this point. So I'm just wondering from your perspective, like how would you situate this moment in the WNBA in the context of the league's history?
Yeah, it's absolutely an exciting moment. And it's, the popularity of Caitlin Clark and to different degrees, Angel Reese and Camila Cardoso and Cameron Brink coming onto the stage is certainly bringing a lot of new eyeballs and new fans, new business interest. But also, I think the timing is so good because the WNBA has been on an upward trajectory for the last 5 years. And so what's really exciting is that viewership has been increasing, attendance has been increasing. All of the franchises are in really pretty solid places right now of growth and investment. The league has a lot of new partners. And so this new attention, it's kind of coming, it's like adding fuel to a fire that's already burning pretty steadily. And that I think is such a great place to be, as opposed to having, these people come in and be expected to quote unquote save the league or resurrect the league. So that's the important context I think people are sometimes missing, is that, because it's their first time watching, they think it's everyone's first time watching, but the truth is that it has been booming. I think that positions the W well to capitalize off of this, these increased eyeballs, because it's not in a desperate state right now.
Yeah, that's like a really good point. Like I was at, I'm a Liberty fan, and I was at the finals game when we lost to the Aces on home court, which was really sad, but Barclays was sold out. And this was before, I don't even know if I knew who Caitlin Clark was at like that point in time, to be honest. So I'm just curious, like, it seems like things have really been steadily rising in the last few years. So prior to this new rookie class that is bringing a lot of new eyeballs, like, what levers do you think that were being pulled to put the WNBA on this ascendancy that has been really capitalized on with this new class?
I think, labor rights is a very important part of the story. The WNBA Players Association actually formed 2 years, just 2 years into the WNBA's existence. So it's almost as old as the league itself. And that is such important context because it is just had to fight tooth or nail for every single scrap it's gotten, from the league, all the way through the history. But it really started gaining steam and gaining cultural force, I think, around the Black Lives Matter movement. I think, first of all, I do want to say, like, even when we're talking about this, right, the down years, like, if you look back at the Minnesota Lynx when Maya Moore and Lindsay Whalen and Simone Augustus were there, when their finals were there, the Target Center was packed. Like, it was, like, booming. The Sparks Lynx finals are some of the best basketball you will ever see, period, like that rivalry. But I think that, in the summer of 2016, the summer 2016, I believe it was, with the Black Lives Matter protest and the deaths of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling, you really saw the WNBA players at the forefront of social activism. This was the summer before Colin Kaepernick took a knee. WNBA players were holding media blackouts. Like, they were saying, I was covering the Washington Mystics at the time. I was a beat reporter, and we would go into their locker room and they would say, we are only talking about police brutality against Black people today. And this really put them on the radar of a lot of people who don't, normally follow sports, and especially women's sports. And I think the way they were able to use their voices as voices for social justice, to advocate for themselves, for their community, for the queer community, to fight against. I mean, the league was not supportive of their activism at all at first. It tried to fine the players. It tried to shut it down. And through that, the players and the players' union only got stronger. And that solidarity from that summer helped lead directly to the solidarity that helped them fight for their 2020 CBA, which is the one they're currently under, which at the time was a groundbreaking CBA. It almost doubled the price for top players from around $120,000 to $220,000. And I think now it's up to about $240,000 because, of course, there are mechanisms to increase. The rookie scale went from in the 40s to in the 70s. And the CBAs before that, you hadn't seen that much growth at all. So it's so funny because already that CBA looked so out of date, based upon the viewership numbers, based upon the growing excitement around the league, based upon the attendance, based upon the new sponsors. But it's important not to rewrite history and to say that I don't think you can tell the story about the WNBA's current boom without starting that summer when they were doing the media blackouts for the Black Lives Matter protests.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you brought that up because I remember in 2020, which I think was another big moment for the league. The NBA had their walkouts, had their strikes, but that was only after the WNBA players had done it already. And we're walking out wearing Black Lives Matter shirts, and we're saying we're not going to play in the bubble. And I think the whole situation with the Atlanta Dream and stuff like that.
They flipped a Senate seat. They helped flip a Senate seat.
Which is wild.
It's all connected, right? And I think that's why, some of the new fans are well, take, we don't want to talk about the social justice stuff or, don't bring race into this and everything. And I think the reason that does hit W fans so hard and W players so hard is because I think when you started really seeing the turnaround for the cultural import of the W is when they stopped listening to people who were saying that, right? For years, the W hadn't been at the forefront of social issues. It had tried to keep players in the closet and promote players who are more white and feminine. You know, I mean, if you look back at how Sue Bird was marketed when she first got in the league, right? Like, you know, she was going to events with Nick Carter. Like, they were totally trying to make her like a Britney Spears, like, but like a, you know, not the bad Britney Spears, like the good Britney Spears, you know? I mean, it's just ridiculous. And, you know, I think that for so long, you know, I think that because we don't have that many female athletes as role models, and because we especially don't see many Black women, and certainly not, you know, more masculine styles and presentations of womanhood and gender, that the W shied away from that and didn't want to forefront that. But I think it was right when the W players started sharing more of their personal lives, started coming out, started embracing fashion of all types, and starting advocating openly for Black lives and for queer lives. Like, that's when you saw the league really start to blossom. So to say, leave that at the door, that's like that's like telling them to like put away their superpower almost.
It's been really interesting to watch, like, just from my purview of like games that I've gone to, of like how the fan base has changed as the players have been allowed to be more of themselves, like the people that I think feel more connected to it. But I'd love to ask you a little bit more about the CBA, because I think, yeah, that's a really important piece of this puzzle as well. And I recently just watched Shattered Glass, which I saw you in as well. But I think the CBA obviously was huge. The 2020 CBA, you mentioned like the pay scale, and there were different benefits and stuff included. But I know that a lot of players feel as if it hasn't gone far enough. And I know that there's an option for them to opt out at the end of this year. So I'm just wondering, like, from their perspective, or from what you've heard and from your perspective, what is missing, and like what does the league still need to make up for, I guess, in terms of overall player compensation and wellness?
I mean, you know, one of the main things was travel, which the league has taken care of this year, which is phenomenal, right? So that's one thing that I know the players were going to fight really hard for in this next CBA, but it's nice they don't have to. But look, the number one thing is the salary cap just needs to drastically increase. The salary cap has been going up by 10%. 30%, you know, these marginal increases in the salary cap. You know, I mean, I think you can look and maybe see it go from, you know, in 10 years, maybe double, right? And but from 700,000 to like now where it's about 1.3, 1.4 million, you know? So these are just such incremental changes. And it's so hard to do a lot with that as far as meaningfully increasing player salaries. So I think just number one is there needs to be a much larger salary cap. I'm not talking increase it by 50%. I think it needs to at least triple. And that might sound extreme, but I think that the league, if this TV deal comes as big as it could, it should not be ridiculous to have $5 million or $6 million as a salary cap. Like, it just shouldn't. If they're bringing in 150, and that's a conservative estimate, you know, $1 million per year on broadcasting deals. So when that happens, you can start seeing these salaries breathe a little bit. And I think there also needs to be mechanisms for some flexibility. Maybe get rid of the hard cap. Maybe there is an injured reserve. Maybe they can keep practice players. Maybe, you know, they can offer full, you know, they do offer full benefits now for pregnancy, but it really does punish the teams. The pregnancy benefits are pretty good right now. That was something that was achieved in the previous CBA. But again, because of the tight salary cap. So I'm just repeating myself over and over again. But I think that's it all comes down to that. Give the players more money.
Yeah. I mean, and it's interesting too, because with the increased growth, like the increased number of eyeballs on the league, the more that we're all aware of sort of the machinations of it, like Brittany Griner's detainment in Russia, like allowed a lot of people to understand that, like, oh, she doesn't make enough money to support herself and her family just playing. in the US. So she has to be in Russia over the summer. Or like Caitlin Clark, who's everywhere, is only getting paid, $75,000 a year, 76 or whatever it is. And I remember like seeing the Skylar Diggins-Smith situation where she doesn't feel like she was treated fairly, like postpartum. It's like this double-edged sword for the league, but I think it's great in the sense that people are aware of these things. And I wanted to ask you a little bit, like we were talking at the beginning of the call, about media coverage in general, because that also I think is a double-edged sword, because we're talking just the Monday after. There's over the weekend, the Chicago Size and the Carter hard fouled Caitlin Clark, and it has created a storm of conversation. And I think that has been brewing in the month or so that she's been in the league already, where a lot of people feel like some WNBA players are being really unfair to Caitlin Clark and being really, really physical. And some people are like, this is just the general rookie treatment. And I think it's brought up this whole conversation that's about gender, that's about race, that's about all these different things. From your perspective, is all coverage good coverage? Like, is it good just that people are talking about it?
I think I would have said yes a while ago, but right now I'm like, no, we need to take away your rights. Like, people are so weird about women. Like, men are so weird. Yeah. And it just goes to like what I've been writing about, which is just kind of how threatening this all feels to men, I think, and men who have been in the sports space. The growth of women's sports is upsetting the status quo, and there's starting to be this really ridiculous backlash. I mean, just today it was, Stephen A. Smith saying, who has done more coverage of the WNBA than First Take, which is just one of the most ridiculous sentences I've
absolutely absurd.
And he was being serious. Like, it's just absurd. And then you had, anyways, Pat McAfee, use the B word when talking about Caitlin Clark. And like, it's just out of control. But I think everything is really, really, really heightened. And I'm not surprised. I think that it is sensitive for players in a predominantly Black league to have their history and their value kind of completely erased and undermined by a public who just wants to focus on Caitlin Clark. And there is a lot of the narrative around it that, not by Caitlin herself, but there's a lot of great white hope being put on her arrival to the W. Things are on the upward swing already. And the truth is that Caitlin Clark needs the W just as much as the W needs Caitlin Clark, because this is the platform where she's going to grow her legacy. Like this, it has been built up. It is a steady league that stands the test of time. It does have these television contracts. She is going to be able to create, or at least given the chance to create, a legacy, right? A basketball legacy that rivals the greats, gets her into the Hall of Fame, like all of these things. So I think that there's a couple things here. First of all, Kenny Carter's foul absolutely deserved to be a technical, and like there should absolutely be punishments within the sport and the guidelines of the sport that punish like that. Like it was not a basketball play. Nobody can say it was a basketball play. I don't hear anyone excusing Kennedy Carter's foul or saying like, yay, like that should be allowed in games, right? I think what gets hard is this narrative that all the physical plays like that are uniquely targeted to Caitlin Clark, and that there is this big, huge anti-Caitlin Clark bias amongst players in the league. And more than that, there's people literally saying out loud that they should be nicer to her because of the new fans she's going to bring to the league. And they should be like letting her win even. And so, we're having so many conversations at once. But I don't think it needs to be like, I don't think we need to be pearl clutching, and I don't think we need to be saying that the WNBA has a PR problem because of how players are treating Caitlin Clark. I went back and to a piece I had done about the 2008 brawl between the Sparks and the Los Angeles Sparks and the Detroit Shock, which was Candace Parker's rookie season. And first of all, like, talk about the WNBA having had success in the past. That game, that was just a regular season game. There were 12,000 fans in Detroit there for that game. It was on ESPN2. Like, it was a big deal already. That brawl got started because Flint Pearson, a young, tough, gritty player who was trying to use her physicality to kind of gain a regular starting spot and respect in the league, really hip checked Candace Parker on the free throw line, and a very strong box out. And Candace Parker retaliated, and Candace Parker was the one who was supposed to save the WNBA back in 2008. If you read the coverage, which I reposted a lot of it on Power Plays, like, she had that narrative and around her, and she was actually the MVP her rookie year. Like, absolutely absurd rookie season. That will never be done again. But she said, like, she knew players are coming after her more and being more physical towards her because of her age and her success. Like, it's kind of a normal thing in sports. It all takes on a life of its own because there seems to be this paternalistic desire to protect Caitlin Clark. And if we want to talk about the people who aren't protecting Caitlin Clark, I think that should go to the WNBA itself, who put this schedule in place where the Fever played 11 games in the first 19 WNBA days and flying all around the country, playing the biggest teams in the world. Over 36 of their 40 games are on television when you knew the team was going to be bad, and you're exposing her to this level of attention and gusto and exhaustion that has worn her down. And I'm not sure the Indiana Fever coaches have done a good job of setting her up for success either. So when I look at, like, the people who haven't set up Caitlin Clark for success, or if we should be mad at anyone for the treatment Caitlin Clark's getting, which I don't really think we should, but if, like, that conversation is way less directed to players who are very competitive, and who, I must say, if they weren't being competitive, if they were giving Caitlin Clark special treatment, the people who are criticizing them now would be criticizing them again, just for different reasons.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate this. I think it's so important. I think, I watched the Liberty Fever game yesterday. I mean, and it's kind of just, like, demoralizing. I also really feel for Aaliyah Boston, who is her teammate, who was a Rookie of the Year last year, who it feels like she's expected in her second year to carry so much of the emotional weight of that team. But I guess, like, what would you like to see in terms of how the WNBA can continue to capitalize on this momentum, how they might be able to bring in new viewers, how they might be able to sustain this, and just, like, what are your, like, hopes and dreams for the WNBA?
Yeah, I mean, I hope we just, like, first of all, just, like, everyone take a deep breath and remember that this is a game and that these are grown women who can handle themselves, and that everything's going to be okay. But in the big picture, I think that it's just all about storytelling, and I think you've got to do a better job at telling more stories than just Caitlin Clark's, because it's not fair to her, like, to carry this much of a load. And it's not fair to the other players in the league. It's not fair to anyone. So what I'm worried about is if, A, the league doesn't take some of the spotlight off Caitlin Clark to give her time to grow up, to give her time to adjust, to give her time to breathe, and B, doesn't properly use this spotlight to tell the stories of its other players and its history, then I think we're in a bad spot. So I just hope that the storytelling gets a little bit better. A league is not one person. It just can't be. It cannot be one person. The WNBA isn't, and trying to pretend that it is just damaging to everyone, including Caitlin.
Well, thank you, Lindsay, so much. I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
You know what that music means, Ellen.
It's big swing, small wins time. Jessica, I believe you've got our big swing this week.
Well, as we all like to say, it's all about the kids. And our big swing this year has to go to a kid from St. Petersburg, Florida. I'm talking about Brujat Soma, the 12-year-old, speaking of phenoms, this is a 12-year-old phenom, who won the 96th annual Scripps Spelling Bee, which has become a very nerdy sporting event of its own. My kind of sporting event, perhaps.
Same.
He won actually in a tie-breaking spell-off. I mean, just the thought of it makes me nervous.
Your first word is bruette.
Brouette.
Adelantado.
Adelantado.
Hypercheme.
Hyporchme.
Bicelium.
Biscellum.
He spelled 29 words correctly in a 90-second span to beat his rival, Faizan Zaki, who managed 20 correct words. No mean feat, that. Evidently, Bruhal practiced the spell-off religiously during his training, and it truly paid off. The spell-off is a new feature. It's only been needed once before, but it's, of course, needed when you have somebody who's in a tie with somebody else. And I think we should celebrate this lovely young man. Future spellers take notice of him. And I think we should also do a little shout-out to his family and parents, because I'm sure they have been practicing with him at home for months to be ready for this incredible moment. So congratulations go to Brujat Soma from St. Petersburg, Florida. What's our small win this week?
So this news item really made my week. It's also sports themed. After a very long time of review and calculation, Major League Baseball successfully integrated Negro League baseball statistics from the year 1920 to 1948 in their record books. It was long overdue. It's harder than it sounds. Now, it doesn't erase the years of injustice of a segregated league, and it absolutely reminds us but what was missed by not including these extraordinary players into the mainstream enjoyment of baseball, and of course, in the big conversations about race and respect and dignity and all that very important stuff. Here's one really thrilling change. When you include the Negro League stats, the tragic Josh Gibson, one of my favorite players, replaces Ty Cobb as the all-time batting leader and also replaced Babe Ruth with a stat called on base plus slugging. I could go on, but just Josh Gibson getting his moment in the sun of acknowledgement means so much. But all of these players outperformed under some of the most vile racist conditions. It's a small win, long overdue, but it feels really good.
Oh, what an amazing story. And I just want to say that I think that the Scripps Spelling Bee should include something they call on base plus slugging.
Right?
Spell slugging, perhaps. They could do spell slugging, but without physicality. But
spell it backwards. Like, how fast could you spell it backwards?
In 90 seconds.
Right?
What a beautiful story, Ellen. Thank you for that. Incredible and long overdue.
Yes. And thank you to all the listeners. Stay tuned. We've got another wonderful episode coming up in 2 weeks. And for us, fans go wild. For Alexis Hott, our amazing producer, thank you for pulling all of this together today. Yes! The Design of Business, The Business of Design is a podcast from Design Observer.
Our show is written and produced by Alexis Hott. Our theme music is by Warner Meadows. Justin D. Wright of Seaplane Armada mixed and mastered this episode. Thanks to Adina Karp and Focus Forward Podcast Studio in Providence for production support. And Ellen, who do you want to thank this week special? Just for you.
I would like to thank the Boys of Summer, who are currently making my life interesting than not one but two broods of cicada that has driven me into the back bedroom to record this podcast, and for reminding me that everything is in a cycle.
That's right. There is no light without shadow. There is no podcasting without the din of the natural world.
Yes, that's so true. And for more long-form content about the people redesigning our world, please consider subscribing to our newsletter, Equity Observer and the Observatory, at designobserver.com. The Design of Business, The Business of Design is produced by Design Observer's editorial team. The views and opinions expressed by podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Deloitte or its personnel, nor does Deloitte advocate or endorse any individuals or entities featured on the podcasts.